couple of years later, when my mother was dying, I remember walking through the hallways at work one day, and one of my employees walked by and he said, you could smile every once in a while. And, it was, of course, it hurt my feelings at the time, but then it made me realize he didn't know what I was going through.
Good morning, everybody. It is the first Friday of the month in December, on December the 6th. It's hard to believe that the year is almost over, 2024, and we're about to go into 2025. Thank you all for joining this morning. We got a very, very special guest who I'll introduce here in just a moment. But before we get started, as always, I'd like to welcome everybody. We are very interested in knowing where everyone is from. We see a lot of folks on this coming on this morning. If you don't mind, just kind of stick in the chat there where you're from. We'd love to know that. Maybe reach out to you in the future, and please join us every first Friday of the month. We have a different guest coming on, and also much different topics. I want to also just make mention that if you haven't already, we have a monthly podcast that goes along with our mentoring call that we're doing here. Our friend Eric Kloss, he's the host on that. You can go to Apple, Spotify, YouTube. These mentoring calls are live and they are posted on YouTube. You can go to Tennessee EMS Education Association. You can search that on YouTube and you can find these mentoring calls. And also the podcasts are posted there as well. So please do that. And we would love for you to join us. Give us a like. Also share that amongst your friends. Again, go ahead and put in your chat there where you're from. We'd like to keep up with that. So we get started this morning. We have a very special guest. Today's guest is Tanya Sanderson, our senior. She is a senior director of revenue integrity at Xsolis. Xsolis is a leading IT healthcare company based here in Franklin, Tennessee. Her topic is leading through the fire, maintaining empathy, grace, and integrity amongst transformation, chaos, and adversity. In case you haven't figured out, we have the same last name, so she is my wife. I'm honored to have her on this day, and she's going to bring some really good things that are leadership principles. As I've said here many times before, leadership principles apply no matter what industry you're leading. And so today she's going to bring some really good stuff. So Tanya, again, it's all about you. And let's hear what you got to say. Give us a quick introduction, and then we'll get started.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm a nurse by background. Philip and I met in the ER, almost 30 years ago. I have left bedside nursing, clinical nursing almost 20 years ago. I'm legal nurse consultant, ran my own business for several years, and then spent the last 12 plus years kind of building and leading revenue integrity and denial management teams for two of the largest health systems in the US, and honored to be asked to join you guys today.
Well, we're honored and privileged to have you here today and just wrapping up our year. This is, it's hard to believe the year's gone by so fast. This is our ninth month. We started this in April of this year. And so we're in ninth episode here. And then, of course, 2025 is just coming around the corner. And we've got some really good lineup for next year and look forward to everyone joining us. So this thing called leading through the fire. I think every leader that's on the call today and those leaders that are not on, we can all relate to leading through the fire. And you know, one of the things that we talk about, Eric and I talk about in our leadership course, is you have a choice. You can either pour water or gasoline on fires or conversations. And even in things of transformation, and if you're making change your organization, that's still a principle that can be true. So kind of getting us started here, uh, a question to ask here. What is leading through the fire in your experiences? Give us some examples of fires, chaos, adversity that you've led through.
Yeah, and fires can be like small little brush fires, I think, or sometimes like a raging inferno or forest fire. And everybody has them, like you said, in any industry, in any leadership role. And so especially just over the last, decade or so, in finance and revenue cycle, administrative functions in healthcare, that's really where there's a lot of opportunity to remove waste. And so you're constantly trying to find ways to do things better. There's a lot of centralization. That's where you kind of are taking all the business office functions sometimes and you're moving them all together. And when that happens, you're doing that at a high pace. You're bringing in a lot of work that needs to be done. You're hiring people really quickly. Sometimes you don't always hire the right people because you're just trying to get people in these roles. And then you've got to go through this challenge of then right sizing to get the right skill set. Transformation is similar. So as we build out more automation and robotics in healthcare, AI in healthcare, sometimes that means that your job changes. And that's a good thing because it allows people to work at the top of their skill set. But that means you're changing the roles that people have done, sometimes for 30 years or more. And that's not easy when you're taking long tenured, mature employees that have been doing something for a really long time, and then you're moving that and you're changing that. And sometimes that happens again and again. And so that's not easy. Sometimes you're enforcing policies that maybe hadn't been enforced in the past because that's the right thing to do to be good stewards. And people don't always appreciate that, but that's a necessary task that needs to be done in leadership. And of course, we've all been through the pandemic, and so it's there's all those things that had to happen. You're scrambling, and every industry looked a little bit different. Obviously, you can't send your paramedics or EMTs to work from home, but for us, in a business office setting especially, we were shifting, trying to scramble and get everybody home and set up where they could still do the work. But then we all know that as things shut down, that also impacted the work, especially, like I said, in business office functions. So you had really tough decisions during that time as well. So furloughs or, there's the uncertainty from that, from job security uncertainty. And that's in all of these, centralization, transformation kind of things. But especially in the pandemic when they knew that there were a lot of things, we had to make a lot of tough decisions. And so you have fear of this unknown that's out there, and then fear of the internal, job security and what that might look like in the future. And it's just a couple, of the fires I feel like I've kind of led through over the last 10 plus years, maybe.
Yeah, very true. I mean, transformation and change is not easy. We as human beings, we don't really embrace change. We should, because change is good. If we don't change, we don't grow. There's an old saying that says, "Without change, there'd be no butterflies." So, we have to think about the good in it. And as you said, the uncertainty of fear is really what I think people hear when someone comes in the morning of or the day and says, "Okay, everybody, we know you've been here for a long time, but we're going to change up everything." And I think the word fear really comes into play there. But we as leaders have to just stay firm on what's best for the organization. And as you're going to talk about here in a minute, how we also love and care for the teammate as well, and that's super important. So with that being said, how do you maintain empathy and grace and integrity during these difficult times? Because people, I mean, even if us on this call, if our employer called today and said, "Okay, we're going to change up things," we're going to all be like fearful and uncertainty and just lots of emotions. So we can relate to that. So how do you maintain this empathy, grace, integrity during difficult times?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, you have to remember that there is a person at the end of every decision. And like you said, we have a job to do as leaders. You're leading people, but you're also managing things. You have to manage to make sure that you're meeting your metrics or that you're meeting your goals. And so you still have this responsibility to those that you report to into your organization, but you also have that responsibility to the people that you serve, and that's your teammates that report to you. And so it's really important, and what I've always tried to do is remember what it's like to be on the other side of those decisions. I wasn't always a leader, right? I started off, like everybody else, and you work your way through. It doesn't happen overnight. And I remember what that's like. And so first and foremost, you just can't lose sight that there's another person, there is somebody, and their families that are impacted sometimes by the decisions that you make. And, I think one of the things when we talk about transformation, changing people's jobs, holding people accountable, even with those tough decisions, even when you're holding people accountable, clear is kind. And so it's a Brene Brown quote, and it's just really helping them understand as much as you can why you're holding them accountable, why things are important, not forgetting there's a human aspect, and they may not know all the discussions that are happening, nor should they, or can they always know all those things, those really tough decisions that sometimes are happening behind the scenes. But as much as you can, help them relate to the bigger vision and why you're being good stewards of the resources, or why you're doing what you're doing. I think that's important. And even in the way you hold people accountable, I used to always tell my supervisors and managers that you can have accountability and you can do that with compassion. And so our motto was accountability with compassion, because at the end of the day, people are trying to do their job. You have to hold them accountable. And sometimes there's some tough things happening. And so you just have to be able to do that without a heavy hand. You don't have to always do that. You can do that with compassion. And I think grace, that's kind of that empathy component. Grace is you're going to come under fire, when you've got these responsibilities and when you're holding people accountable. Like, you may take some fire from those above you or those around you. You may take fire from those that you're leading, because they're not going to like those decisions. Sometimes they're not going to like to be held accountable. As adults, especially, we don't like somebody telling us what to do. And so it's natural for people to react negatively. In the pandemic, it's easy for people to lash out. I tell the story often. What really was a turning point for me, and where I think, well, there's a couple of things that I started to really understand what it means to give grace. And I as your wife, I've seen you when you were going through your own fires in some of your jobs, and seeing the late nights and the stress that you're under behind the scenes. That changed my perception, even from some of my senior leaders. So if they were short, or they didn't maybe respond the way they normally had, I remembered what you were going through, and it allowed me to give grace to those above me, and to step up and even try to do more to kind of help, calm the fires for them. And then, maybe a couple of years later, when my mother was dying, I remember walking through the hallways at work one day, and one of my employees walked by, and he said, you could smile every once in a while. And, it was, of course, it hurt my feelings at the time, but then it made me realize he didn't know what I was going through. He didn't know my mother was dying, or, those tough decisions that I was needing to make. Sorry. And so that's really one of those turning points, that you don't know what your folks are going through. They could be going through something very similar. They could have a loved one who is at end of life. They could be going through a divorce. They could be, going through financial difficulties, and you don't know. And so it's really important as leaders that we don't forget that we don't forget that these are humans, and that they have challenges. And so when somebody isn't at their best, or somebody doesn't respond necessarily in the way that you would expect, it's important to give grace and to understand that. And integrity is a given. The role I'm in, I first started in revenue integrity almost 13 years ago, because integrity was important to me. I wanted to make sure that I was in a role that um, I was proud of, that I knew I was doing the right thing, especially transitioning out of kind of that legal environment. And so really leading with integrity is making sure that above all, you're doing the right thing, what you believe to be the right thing in the best interest of your company and in the best interest of your employees. And as a leader over the years, I worked with lots of leaders all over the country. And so many times I see people that are so focused on growing their own career, so focused on doing what's best for them and their career and what they want, they're really not making the best decisions for the organization or their employees. They're making the best decisions for them. And I once commented on an article. It was a really good article on LinkedIn about, finding your North Star. And, if you're following your North Star in just about your career, then as a leader in an organization, I'd have to be concerned who's watching out for my organization and the things that we need to do. Like you, who's watching out for your patients? Like it is more important to do what's right for your employees and for your organization than just for your career. And so to me, leading with integrity above all is making sure you're doing the right thing for those you serve, and that's both above and below. And I think the other thing that's really important to remember, how to maintain that integrity and that empathy and grace during those really tough times. And, we've all been through them is, remembering that fires aren't always a bad thing. I think every difficulty, even in my personal life, which the song that Lee was playing at the beginning, it's kind of my, once I heard it, I latched on. I love that song because over my life, starting off young and even through my career, you're always gonna have hurdles, and especially growing up poor and in the South, I really had to, overcome that, rise up above some of those challenges, and you do that in your leadership journey as well. You're gonna make mistakes. And so when you are able to go through a fire and you come out on the other side stronger, you're learning through that. And so you'll see it eventually as a blessing. And that's hard to think about when you're actually in those storms. I've had employees that did not like me, and that is a really hard thing. But I knew at the end of the day that I was doing the right thing for them, whether they knew it or not. And I was certainly doing the right thing for my organization. And so there's a satisfaction in knowing that, I'm learning from that. I'm helping others learn from that. So my leaders that I'm leading up and I'm mentoring, I'm able to use those difficult times to help them know how we made decisions, how I'm leading the teams through those things. And so that gives them an opportunity so that when they, encounter those types of challenges in the future, because they're going to, if they stay in leadership, they know how to kind of handle that. So, it's giving you the ability to help others grow during that. It's helping you to make sure that you grow through that, and giving you an opportunity to really emulate the kind of leadership that you would want others to have. And I think one of the other things is, like I said, when you know you're doing the right things for your employees, even when they don't know it, they don't know that it could have been much different. You have the satisfaction of knowing that you've given them the gift of kindness, whether they knew it or not. And when you extend them grace, when they're not in their best or when they don't respond in a professional way, you're giving them that gift of kindness. And so I think it's really important to know that even through the fire, you're actually it's an opportunity to learn and to grow.
Yeah, well, you spoke of, servant leadership. Definitely a good job there. And we talk about this on every call is that it's all about others, and self-serving leaders they're they're just terrible leaders. That's just, I just put it plain. I mean, because it's all about the others. It's this call goes by so fast. So folks out in the waiting room, if you have questions, go ahead and start thinking about those. Put those in chat. In about 3 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes at max, we'll start opening up for questions. But I can tell for the folks that are listening to this, as your husband, you have lots of grace in your heart, kindness in your heart. You are the most giving, kind person ever. And I mean that, and so I can attest to that for sure. That is who you are, and when you're leading through the fire, and as human beings, there are a lot of folks that are very kind and giving, and it's hard for us as leaders when we get in these positions to be able to have to transform and make change and do things that are not popular amongst our teammates, and that's very hard. So you gave us some really good feedback on that. So as we're waiting for questions to come in, let's talk about how you lead yourself. That's important because as leaders, we're all about others. We're serving others. We're trying to do what's best for them, what's best for the organization. But in somewhere in all of this, we have to take care of ourselves because stress is a real thing. And mental wellness is a real thing. And so how do you lead yourself, your family, uh, you know, through this chaos, fire, and adversity, and why?
Yeah, and you like you kind of alluded to, you have to remember that it's not just your staff that's going through a fire, or through these difficult times. You are as well, and yours looks different from theirs. You're kind of caught in there's these illustrations you see out there. You've got somebody that's caught between a rock and there's a snake on the top, and then there's, this bottom pit on the bottom, and they're trying to pull people up, and it's kind of like that. I'm not saying I have snakes above me, but you've got pressure from above, you got pressure from below, and those two sides, excuse me, don't always know that. It's like the iceberg, right? You see what's on top, you don't always see what's on the bottom. And so, you're going through the stress of just normal life, and then you've got the stress of all these other things that you're trying to work through with your team. And so that your fire looks even different than maybe what your staff does or what your leaders do. And you've still got this job to do. You've got all these metrics that you have to maintain. And sometimes you come under attack personally. I'm a very soft-hearted person sometimes, and that was really difficult when I knew that employees weren't, my employees didn't like me at the time. I was always priding myself on having some of the highest employee satisfaction scores. I'm very competitive, Phil knows this. And so, that was one of the things I always prided myself. We, as leaders, we'd sit around in leadership meetings and compare the employee satisfaction scores. And, I'd always tease everybody if I won. And so when you don't have that, and that, people don't understand the decisions you're making, and so they're kind of talking about you, or it's you're coming under attack, that's hard. You're just always going to have some of that adversity. And so I think it's important to make sure that you take care of yourself. And one of the ways that I do that is I like to remember, especially when I'm being critiqued, or there's the critics out there, is there's a quote by Theodore Roosevelt. And it's in a famous speech that's been quoted all over. But it's essentially the man in the arena. And the key points are that remember that the credit belongs to the man in the arena, the person who's down there in the fight, doing the hard work, who's trying their best and doing so for a valiant cause. It's easy to criticize others. It's much harder to get in there and do it yourselves. It's the Monday morning quarterback kind of thing. It's easy for other people to critique if they don't know what it's like in the moment. There's no effort without error. You're going to fail, you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to grow from that. I can remember as a very young leader 20 plus years ago, in a situation, telling a much more tenured nurse to do something a certain way. And when questioned, I was like, just because I said so. I obviously have learned over the years that's not good leadership. And so, you're going to make those mistakes, and then you're going to grow from those. And, if you're going to fail, then fail while daring greatly. And so, if you've never read the speech, Man in the Arena, I strongly encourage you to go find that, Google it, and read it, because that's a really good way to remind yourself and to keep yourself grounded. I always, especially during the difficult times. But I've had some of those, transformational fires where, I was leading teams constantly through different changes, and it was hard, and we were having to make a lot of really tough decisions that I knew impacted their livelihood, that would impact, their own, you know, kind of their feelings and then mentally. And so I was really dealing with the right ways to do that. And so, I started every morning in a prayer corner. I set it up in my office, and I didn't start my day until I started in prayer. Sometimes if I had to make really tough decisions, I would go and seek scripture that would actually help and speak to that specific thing that I was going to encounter that day, or I knew I needed to do. You have to remember to focus on your why you do what you do, why you're in your role, why you're called to leadership, because leadership is a calling. I think you have to block the noise and the distraction. So if you think about being in the arena and you've got people screaming and the critics and whatever, sometimes you just have to block the noise. You have to focus on getting your team through that fire, and focus on those folks who really are trying. And you're going to have those that just want to fan the flames of the fire. They just want to pick apart everything and bring everybody back. And you've got to block that noise out and focus on everyone else and get them through, and not let that negativity take everybody backwards. Control that as much as you can, but you still have to stay open to feedback and be willing to learn through that. I think it's important. There's a book, Leading with a Limp. And as leaders, it talks about, you're carrying the weight. And I think you mentioned this, you're carrying the weight of a lot of people. You're carrying the weight of your family. You're carrying the weight of your employees. You're carrying the weight of your organization on your shoulders. And that sometimes can be really, really a heavy weight. And so the book talks about, making sure that you take care of yourself, having a person, having a circle that, you can really trust and support, and that you can talk to and be vulnerable with, male or female. You have to have somebody to be able to talk to during some of those difficult times. And you have to have boundaries. And Philip knows this, that there's times, and it was the same way with him. I would see him, still 10:30 at night working or in meetings. Same with me. There would be times it would be 10 or 10:30 and I'm still, on the computer. It's really hard to, in a remote world, to kind of cut away. And you have to remember there's only 1,440 minutes in a day, and you can't let the fire consume you. You can't let work and all these stressors take those minutes away from you, because it takes them away from your family as well. It takes it away from your health, and you have to focus and remember that ultimately, your family has to come first. That has to come before the job. And so I think just remembering to treat yourself like you want to treat your employees, with empathy and with grace and integrity. It's the same thing. And I've heard you say it on the podcast, the most important person that you'll ever lead is yourself. And so I think taking those same principles and how you deal with yourself is of utmost importance.
Yeah, well, those are great things. We've got questions and we're running short on time, so I'm going to click over right quick to some of these questions. Thank you guys for putting those in there. That was some great information. Lots to unpack there. Let me scroll here real quick, grab these questions. Okay, so here's the question here. Um, what do you do to stay connected to staff and have a great understanding what they are going through, and stay grounded in empathy, grace, and etc. So you spoke to some of that. We are actually really out of time, but can you kind of answer that real
Yeah,
quick?
I think, as much as you can, continue to stay connected. Even when it's really easy to get behind a closed door and not speak to people when you're going through a hard time, but that's not the right thing to do. So as much as you can still connect. And, in a remote world, it's having a Teams meeting. If you're in an office setting or, at a station house, it's just going by and making sure that you're still connecting with them and being approachable and being personable with them. I think that's extremely important. And just always remember what it would feel like. Put yourself in their position and try to think like them, to know what they're going through and be able to relate to that.
All right, one more real quick question here. Any advice on helping experienced staff when they are having a difficult time with changes? You spoke about that at the beginning.
I really have always tried to make sure, as much as I can help them understand the why. Healthcare is changing, and most industries are changing. And so helping them understand the bigger picture why, It's not just for your organization, especially in healthcare. It can be for the whole healthcare industry and for your communities. And so being able to find whatever it is, there is a reason why you're making those tough decisions and why you're making making change happen. And so as part of change management, as much as you can help them understand what the why is, it goes a long way.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. We're about 30 seconds till our time is done. Thank you so much, Tanya, for joining us. Everybody, please have a wonderful weekend, a very happy and merry holiday season, New Year. We look forward to seeing you back here on January 3rd, 2025 for a great year and lots of great topics and lots of great leaders and speakers. Please be careful in this holiday season and remember the most important person you ever lead is yourself. And we look forward to seeing everyone in January on January 3rd, 2025. Please invite a friend. Thank you so much, Tanya, and everybody for joining.